stand by.
This week on Inland Sessions,
I listen to the birds sing of what lies ahead. Disaster.
Spokane poet Janelle Cordero shares her poignant and moving poetry from her newest book, Woke to Birds.
Hi, I'm Janelle Cordero, and I'm here to read you a little poetry. I have my book with me, Woke to Birds, which was published in October of 2019, and it combines poetry and artwork in a way that's pretty organic, but also purposeful. It was a really fun project to do, and I'm excited to read you some poems from it. And the first poem I'm going to read is the very first poem in the collection, and I want you to read that one first because it does a good job of setting the tone for the entire rest of the book. It's very short, very sweet, but it helps me remember to slow down and appreciate the world around me despite its flaws and its brokenness, because someday I won't be here. And the poem is called Best Way. The best way to love a place like this is to remember we all leave someday. So I told you it was really short. That's the very first poem. And the next poem I want to read to you is about what it's like to be an introvert and to want to constantly be the observer rather than the participant. And I think that a lot of artists, a lot of poets, a lot of creators in general can feel that way. They're like, I just want to observe, but don't ask me to be a part of this thing. So this poem is called Nervous. I blush in unexpected situations, like when a stranger says hi when I'm out walking the dog. I know the formula. Say hi back, smile, wave, nod, give something of myself away. But it's like in school when you study hard for a test and you memorize the whole damn textbook, but you're still nervous all the same. So I don't know if you've ever felt that way, but I felt that way all the time in school. You're studying and you get nervous. That's how social interactions are for introverted people. The next poem I'd like to read is inspired by a story in my East Central neighborhood in Spokane, and it highlights just the small tragedies that occur in our everyday lives. And this poem is called Ritual. His neighbors ask him why he doesn't just buy a damn radio. That's not the point. It's all part of the routine. Leaving the house, smacking the pack of cigarettes on his palm as he walks to the car, starting the engine and tuning the radio to baseball, listening to the game while he burns 1, 2, 3 Marlboro Reds. No one around to share with. Just as well. His wife hated the smell, so there he was in the car. And the neighbors say, why not the porch? But that just doesn't work in the wintertime, and there's no use changing one part of the routine. Consistency is key. But now he's alone and could smoke wherever he damned well pleased, the neighbors say, as if this is some kind of consolation for having his whole world ripped away. This ritual is a part of him now. His life wouldn't make any sense without it, kind of like how it doesn't make any sense without her, but he keeps waking up just the same. I was definitely always into writing. I grew up and made really sketchy books with printer paper and staples, and drew all kinds of weird stuff in them with pencil, and wrote stories about aliens and whatever kids think about and gave them away. So definitely always into writing. I probably started writing really terrible poetry in high school and then learned that it didn't have to rhyme in college, and things got better from there. The next poem is a little nod to the poet Carl Sandburg, who was an early 1900s American poet and wrote a lot about modern industrialism and those kinds of fun things. And this poem is called Million Deaths. Carl Sandburg says we each have a million deaths to die, and we should be given a new name each time we die, into a new world. See, dying is the same as birth, because they both take us to a new and different place. So why be afraid? I ask this because I am afraid. And the next poem I'm going to read is another tribute to my East Central neighborhood and all of the wonderful and strange things that occur there. And it includes details like this really sketchy ice cream van that rolls through and haunts us in the summertime, and the wise gas station attendant that we always get advice from. So I want to read that one for you. It's called Lighthearted and Heavy-Hearted. The ice cream truck, edit, pastel spray-painted van, its knowable melody close by, sirens somewhere far off, but still the two existing in the same moment. Lighthearted and heavy-hearted, just like me and you. Some days were made for breaking everything and starting over. More sirens. I pray by lifting my hands and thinking of nothing. I pray by singing your name over and over. The gas station attendant from Nepal told my husband everything is a moment. There are moments of sadness, moments of happiness. We can't become too sad or too happy because both will pass. All we are left with is our center. The ice cream truck melody and the sirens fade. I cover my ears with my palms to hear the beating of my heart inside my head. Funny how foreign it sounds, how unlike anything else, how small. And the next poem is one that focuses on how weird it is to be a human and all of the strange things that we're afraid of, from really small, tiny things to really massive, scary things. So this poem is called Madness. Some days I am afraid of small things, like playing the piano in front of anyone. Other days I'm afraid of large things, like death or the silence of God. I do not worry about small things and large things at the same time, because that would be something like madness. This next poem is another one that's just super teeny tiny, but it was inspired by studying little Zen Buddhism and trying to understand that concept of emptiness and the void and how powerful yet how minuscule our mind is and our thoughts are. And this one is called A Thought Comes. A thought comes and I turn it inside out to see what it's made of. And by handling it like an object rather than a truth, I find it has no power. And this next poem I'm going to read for you is focusing on how strange it is that we have something like an internal persona that's placed inside this very physical world in this physical body, and trying to justify that. And you can call that whatever you like, whether it's a soul or a spirit or just energy or your personality, your ego, however you want to refer to it. It's there, and sometimes it's hard to grapple with something that's not quantifiable and that you really can't prove to anyone else. So this poem is called What Does That Tell You? There's no way to explain the feeling of waking up to another day in my body, in my brain, and without any evidence of the soul. I know it's there, but convincing others is the problem. It's like I have an invisible friend from childhood who never went home when it was time for dinner, and rather the friend just hung around like some forgotten kid on the curbside of a closed school and waited for a parent who never showed up. This invisible friend, this soul, is part of everything that means anything. But when I try to look straight at it, I see only me. What does that tell you? And the very last poem that I'm going to read to you from this book is the last one in the collection. And it does a good job of just summing up this journey of writing this book and trying to understand what it means to be a soul in a physical world. It's pretty weird, and I think you guys know what I mean. So this title is Try to Name. There are people I miss who I don't really remember. Maybe it's my energy missing their energy. I'm not embarrassed to think this. Materialism makes no sense to me. The whole world disappears all the time, and I'm left with whatever is inside my head. Nothing decomposes, and it all means so intensely. Forgive me for believing in what I can't and won't try to name. I really like exploring the spiritual aspect of the world, and I don't know what that means. I won't know what that means probably my entire life, because I feel like spirituality is a journey that requires a lifetime of devotion, but I really like exploring religions and spirituality. I write a lot about death, which I hope isn't super morbid, but it probably is. And I also am really inspired by the stories of everyday people. I'm inspired by my neighborhood, by Spokane, and all the weird, gritty things that happen here. I'm inspired by gas station attendants and the grocery store clerk and my 94-year-old grandpa and just all the people in my life that I learned from. I have a few poems that I'd love to read for you that will be published in a book that's coming out in December called Many Types of Wildflowers. And the first poem I'd like to read from that upcoming collection is called I'll Have What I Have Now. I spend an unreasonable amount of time thinking about death, because science tells me I will die, and my body will decay. I can be buried in a mushroom suit that feeds my decomposition to the fungi spores, or I can be buried in a pod that will grow into a tree above ground. Or I can be burned and then spread in a body of water, like herbs shaken into a broth. The body does not survive, and religion tells me the body will die, dust to dust. But something beyond the body, some essence of me, is eternal and will live on. I want something in between rot and forever. Something like the 905 years given to Enoch. I know everyone says this, but I wouldn't waste it. Maybe some days would be spent just sunning in the grass, but the rest of the time I'll wake up early to spend hours at my desk reading manifestos and studying the many languages and religions of the world. I'll travel to every country, and I'll know and love so many generations. I'll have what I have now, but more so. This next poem from that upcoming collection really highlights my wariness of technology and artificial intelligence. I'm just a little nervous about the direction of humans wanting to implant chips into their brains and that sort of thing. And that could just be me being fearful and paranoid, but I don't even know how to be a human yet, so I'm not really ready to be a robot. And this poem is called A Child Fails the Math Test. There's talk of transplanting our memories into robots before we die as a way to live on. How little we understand of being human, and we're already trying to move beyond human, the way a child fails the math test on chapter 5, but must still move on to chapter 6. I always thought that was weird in school. And I'm like, I failed that last test. I shouldn't be moving on. But that's how we do it. This next poem is called Remind Me. Remind me what spring feels like. Remind me of how the ground thaws and the hiking trails turn muddy with snowmelt. Remind me of the buttercups and the glacier lilies that grow in sunny spots on the hills, and remind me of how the tree branches bud and leaves unfurl. Remind me of how the sun sets later and later in the evenings, and how the mornings are still brilliant with frost. Remind me of how nothing lasts, not the flowers or the cold mornings, not our bodies or our memories. Remind me that it is better not to live forever. The biggest challenge would be believing that it means something. There are already so many words in our world that sometimes I have to ask myself the question, like, does any of this matter? Why are you doing this? But I do it because I have to. So I think that's the biggest challenge, is reminding myself that this is my process of honoring the world, and I have to do it no matter what. This next poem is the title poem for that upcoming collection, Many Types of Wildflowers, and it focuses on this concept of religious pluralism and the fact that all of these paths lead to the same kind of love, essentially. So, many types of wildflowers. I believe in my religion the same way I believe in all religions, like a child trying to make sense of the many types of wildflowers in a field and deciding they're all the same because they're all alive. And this next poem I wrote in early 2020, like February, and unfortunately it's been very prophetic, which I wish it wasn't, but it's called Disaster. Barely 40 degrees, but the sun is out and the skies are blue, so I sit on my back porch in jeans and a long sleeve shirt. I wrap my arms around myself when the wind comes on. I listen to the birds sing of what lies ahead. Disaster, for all I know, but these birds make everything sound so sweet. I hope for connection. I hope that something about my work touches something inside of them and they say, oh, I've been there before. Just that universal connection of one human saying, life is weird, right? And another human being like, yeah, life is really weird. And that poem did a good job of capturing that. So just that connection. And now I'm going to move on to just a couple poems from a collection that will be published in 2021, and it focuses more on family and childhood and ancestry, lineage, all those good things. So this poem is called Something Sharp and Cold. I can't fish anymore. It was hard enough as a kid. I wasn't squeamish about the worm. The hook was the problem. The hook with its cruel, pronged point. I remember sitting on the dock with my brother and praying for the fish to leave. Please, God, I'd say to myself, don't let a fish bite my line. Imagine how my faith shriveled every time my bobber went under. The worst was when a fish swallowed the hook with the worm. I had to hold the squirming trout with one hand and reach into its mouth with the other. There was always blood. If I couldn't get the hook undone, we had to cut the line. But most of the time, I could get the hook undone. Sometimes we kept the trout for our father to grill, and other times we would toss the shocked bodies back into the black water and watch them sink. Swim, I'd pray. Swim, swim away. That was then. I can't fish anymore, not with what I know about pain. I picture something sharp and cold hooking me from the inside, pulling me against my will towards some impossible and blinding light, towards mystery, towards death. This poem is one about how weird I was when I was little. You'll understand. It's called First Grade. In first grade, I wore denim shorts to school every single day, even in the winter. I was trying to prove something. My parents were divorcing, and I wanted to be tough. So I wore my long denim shorts, hand-me-downs from my older brother, and I wore my black Raiders jersey and a backwards baseball cap. It was a costume that lasted a long while, a uniform that meant I wouldn't cry or talk about my feelings. And after a while of not talking about them, my feelings went away, like gods without any worshipers. I can just picture that little kid with her baseball cap on backwards and her long denim shorts. First grade. This next poem is also about being a little kid and causing pain to another person and just not knowing what to do with that. And it's called Cruelty's Blessings. The apple tree produced very little fruit. We climbed it as children and hung from the gnarled branches. The few apples the tree did offer up were always hard and small, so we would pick them and throw them at one another. I threw one at the neighbor girl and hit her in the stomach. Her whole body caved in on itself, and she fell to the ground. I thought she died. I took off running. I'm not proud of it, but I couldn't face her pain then, the pain I caused. I can barely face it today, to tell you the truth. Where is she now? Did she go on living beyond that moment? What cruelties has she encountered, and what blessings? For weeks, I had to go back to that question of, why should I be putting more words into the world when there are a lot of people of color who are underrepresented in the literature world and who need their voices amplified a lot more than a white woman needs her voice amplified? So just trying to grapple with that and trying to just be the best ally that I can be, continuing to learn and read and go to our peaceful protests here in Spokane, just trying to in some ways be quiet for a little while and just to listen and say, how can I help? And this is the very last poem that I have to read for you, and it's about childhood and how strange it is and how we can't really make sense of it or appreciate it until we're far beyond it. And it's called Impossible Years. Nearly everything is forgotten, everything but those impossible years of childhood. There were always woods nearby, woods of pine and fir and cedar with dirt paths like fairy tales. Ferns and clover and fallen pine cones, the sunlight shifting through the trees. It was easy to believe in everything back then. God, magic, good and evil, heaven most of all. Nothing made sense without heaven. We didn't know the woods were heaven. We didn't know childhood was heaven, the eternity of those years. Now we know. We are so far away from those times, from those woods with the dirt trails and roots splitting the ground. And that's all the poetry I have to read for you today. And again, the book that I read from is called Woke to Birds, and it's available at Auntie's or the Barnes & Noble in the Northtown Mall and the Well-Read Moose out in Coeur d'Alene. And I want to thank you for listening. And my next book comes out in December of 2020 called Many Types of Wildflowers. And I'd be honored if you read it. Thank you.